the Trillion Trees podcast hosted by Saad Al-Lawala. Join the movement. 1 trillion trees by 2030. Tune in for inspiring stories, groundbreaking ideas, and real solutions to tackle climate change. Listen to it. Watch every Saturday, 4 p.m. Make an impact now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Trillion Trees podcast. Today, we're joined by Damani Thomas, founder and CEO of Carbon Neutral Initiative in Jamaica. Damani is working on a really interesting solution called DE30, which is a semi-synthetic biofuel made by agriculture waste that aims to decarbonize transport while strengthening local energy security in the Caribbean. Damani, it is great to have you here and welcome to the Trillion Trees podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here and great to really tell the world what we are doing here in Jamaica and strengthening the circular economy.
Definitely. So I want to start more on your journey before we talk about how you started, what you're working on, and the fuel, biofuel. I want to start on your journey. So what pushed you personally into, climate innovation and clean fuels, and what really struck as a how did you get into climate? What did you study? Tell me more about that.
Right. So I've always been drawn to environment from I was young. Always at a garden, just always have a strong interest in trees, forests, animals, and so on. So when I was in high school, I was always drawn to sciences as well. So in high school, I started developing my solution, the defossilized 30 biofuel, which is DE30 for short. Um, what really pushed me is I saw that there was a need for energy security all around the world, lowering carbon footprint, and really there was a major push in education in environment during my time in high school. I think that's when it really started to get the younger generation involved. So I'm happy to say that I was a part of that first well, not sure if it's the first generation, but one of the earlier generations, and to take it very seriously and further see that later generations take it very seriously as well. So what drove me to this is I did environmental studies after college. Well, after high school, I went into environmental studies because I always had an interest in environment. And from there, I learned a lot more about how D30 could be applied to the real world and not just a theoretical solution.
Definitely, I think so. That is a real, that real solutions are definitely needed. So, you know, why is like you talked about energy security? So why is energy security like such a critical issue for Caribbean nations specifically right now?
Yes, so energy security, energy is what drives a nation. The two most important things to a nation and its people, it's energy and its food, which is still in sense energy. So if we
Hmm.
can get our energy under control, and of course, one of the the largest contributor to the carbon emissions and so on stem from the energy sector, from both transport and energy generation for the electricity, electrifying, energizing your house and so on.
Mm.
So if we can get our energy under control, then that is the main thing I see as the the, the largest impact.
Definitely. Many of the island states rely heavily on fuel imports.
Yeah.
And that is exactly why an idea like this that takes in local and sustainable material and created like the fuel out of it that actually can help transportation, that is very effective and that would be very effective. But when I talk about the fuel imports, how does that affect economic resilience in the island states that we're talking about?
Exactly. So regarding to the energy, how it goes is that we have to plan around energy rather than energy planning around us. So it's not a matter of, oh, we can allocate this amount of money to there. No, it has to be allocated there because it's a need.
Mm-hmm.
So similar to homage to the situation that's going on in the Middle East right now, with 20% of our global energy being shut down because of the shutdown of the Strait of Hormuz.
Mm-hmm.
Australia has already seen the effects of it, saying that they are really not ready because they have like less than a month worth of fuels. Now, where D30 comes in regarding that, D30 helps a country to meet 100% of its energy need and around 80% of the budget. So so let's say Australia has 30 days. With D30, we could stretch that to an extra 10 days or extra 15 days, which would be 15 days more energy to power the entire continent.
That is
Uh,
definitely,
yeah,
a
when it
big,
comes to scale.
yeah, that comes with absolutely, scale. So I want to dive deeper into, what D30 exactly is. So, and how does it differ from traditional biofuels like ethanol? So could you talk more about that?
Yes, so D30 is a next generation biofuel. So what we do is that we use the very same infrastructure and the materials. So we actually do use ethanol, but we use ethanol as our feedstock. What we do is we
Mm-hmm.
convert that ethanol into high alcohols, and that high alcohol is more stable and more energy dense. So that way we can blend even more D30 high alcohol mix into petrol compared to ethanol, because most vehicles, they have a limit of around 10 to 15% ethanol. But with
Mm-hmm.
D30, our minimum is 30%, and we also have a blend that goes up to 60% without affecting the engines. So that is another thing that also help its scalability. So why it's better than ethane: lower emissions, higher energy density, and lower need for fossil fuels. So
Definitely.
we know that we can't change out of fossil fuels tomorrow. As a matter of fact, reports show that we will still be using fossil fuels 10, 20 years from now, because of course population increase and poverty will also be increasing as well. So because of that, fossil fuel will not go away anytime soon, because of course that's there still conflict over resources.
Mm-hmm.
So if if we wouldn't be using petrol in the next 2 decades, we wouldn't be having so much conflict about such resources. So what I propose is to help these countries to sustainably step away from fossil fuel dependency, where we can cut our fossil fuel dependency even 10% per 2 years or per year. So that way we can sustainably step away from importing more and more fossil fuels by lowering the budget for fossil fuels. So that way we can invest that money back into renewables. So that way I created a strategy that help countries fund their own renewable energy infrastructure. So that way the general population can also benefit from having their renewable energy infrastructure being owned by they themselves.
Definitely, I think so. That is a very interesting strategy with coming on to, the newer, um, I like the points that you talked about, how we will still in the future be reliant on fossil fuels because, the need is essentially there, and with the rising population, it gains on to that. So one of the most interesting parts that you talked about of D30, that it does not require any engine modification. So
Yeah.
how important is that for, adoption and scalability?
Yes, so it's extremely important for adoption and scalability because without changing the engines, then that means that the regular driver does not take on any additional cost to themselves. In fact, because of the higher energy density of D30 compared to ethanol and ethane, there's less frequent refueling. So one of the main issues why there has been pushback on ethanol blended fuels, especially in the UK and other parts of the European continent and also in America, is because the ethanol is has a much lower energy density than petrol in comparison, so it burns out quicker. So it might be cheaper for the refinery to use the ethanol blend, but it won't be cheaper for the end user. But the
Hmm.
pricing alone is not the number one benefit when it comes to ethanol blended fuels because of course ethanol burns cleaner. So there is the the benefit there and you can really put a price on your health. However, D30 helps you to enjoy both worlds where we have even cleaner combustion and also lower life cycle emissions alongside having your higher energy density similar to 100% petrol.
Hmm. I feel like these are very interesting facts that I'm also learning about, the the alternative fuels and biofuels. So when you talk about D30 right now, so what has testing and any pilot deployment looked so far? What is the current timeline that you're working on with developing D30 and also taking it to market if it works on?
Yeah. So as for pilots, we have been able to conduct our own pilot, and we're also working with our local refinery here in Jamaica. However, we're always hoping to do pilots in other countries, such as the UK and the US and any other country that deem D30 necessary. Because of course,
Hmm.
D30 is not just a fuel itself; it's an entire strategy for um, energy security, where, as I said, we lower our energy budget so we can invest in in better renewable energy sources, where yeah, better renewable energy sources such as the hydro, wind, and solar, of course. But even though those solutions also have their downsides, blend energy diversification is the way to go for true
Definitely.
sustainability.
So moving on, energy and transport are interlinked, and transport is one of the hardest sectors to decarbonize globally because of many reasons like the rising population, the dependency on it. So why do you feel it is even more complex in developing economies? Because we've seen that, the transition to electric vehicles um, in the West, in the global North. We've seen that. But in the developing economies, there's still a very high reliance on fossil fuels and also, fuel-based transport. So why do you think it is even complex there?
So it's very complex there because again, it comes down to what the population can afford. There has been, from what I know, there has been a lot of incentive for electric vehicles, such as no import, no import costs. So if you're buying an electric vehicle, you buy it as how much it costs without paying import duties and so on. However, unless the grid is green, buying an electric vehicle only helps with pollution distribution and not pollution levels. Meaning that
Mm-hmm.
if the UK has a bunch of electric cars, the areas with the areas that generate the energy, if that's still on fossil fuel, there will be highly toxic, but the city where the electric car is won't be as much. So it changes the distribution, but not the actual levels. In fact, it spikes the levels because energy is lost during during transformation and transport of said electricity through the grid and power lines. So it would actually take more energy than to just go to the service station and buy petrol, unless the grid itself is green. And that is one of the main strategies we are working on, as stated, where we lower the energy budget and invest that into improving, turning the grid green, and then we can slowly but surely step away from the fossil fuel imports. And some might wonder if I'm actually shooting myself in the leg that way, but of course, our technology is very versatile, where we also have applications to decarbonize the marine and sustainable, and we also have a sustainable aviation fuel pathway. So
Mm,
through decarbonizing land transport, we're open to also decarbonize marine and create a scalable, sustainable aviation fuel pathway as well.
definitely, I think so that, when you talked about um the grassroots problem is just not how where it's that, the transportation is just one part of it, and but the grassroots problem that comes with is how we're using fossil fuels to create energy. So like you talked about the grid has to be green itself, because um decarbonizing, transport will just be the tip of the iceberg, and it can only help with, pollution and the environmental aspects of it. But what a greater impact would be when we're using energy by renewable alternatives. So, do you see biofuels as like a transitionary solution, a long-term solution, or a part of, a broader energy mix? What would you comment on that?
All right. So in an ideal world, I would say it should be a transitionary solution. However,
Mm.
based on how everything else is made and the limitations in materials, and also the controversy around said materials, I would say it's best to have it here to stay until a better solution is available. So I would rather it be transitionary, where we are able to use biofuels and less raw fossil fuels, and then we can transition to better levels of renewable energy. However, from what we know, that um, mechanical equipments come from the mining of mechanical equipments is also a humanitarian issue as well,
Mm,
where mining is well, long story short, slavery is used for that type of mining, and it's very much a problem. So there is that as a major problem, and the environmental ramifications of said mining is also
mm,
just as bad, if not worse, than the emissions problem. Because poisoning water or literal life, just our literal lifeline, similar to here. So, of course, I think it will be here to stay because the larger populations will grow on, and of course, resources are finite.
definitely. So, when we coming back to D30, so D30 uses agriculture waste, right? So how does that connect farmers and rural economies into, the clean energy transition that you talked about?
Yes, so I believe that we can. All right, so to make it clear, It's the agricultural waste is one of the raw materials that we can use to make our feedstock. We
Mm,
use any form of lignocellulosic feedstock, meaning any form of organic matter, be it
mm,
forest debris, agricultural waste, or of course, we can also use normal petrol or, well, normal ethanol or waste ethanol to make our solution. However, with the use of agricultural waste, my strategy is to make a circular approach to include farmers. And of course, even if we are making ethanol using using ethanol crops such as sugarcane and corn, we will
mhm,
still be um, including the farmers into the green grid through carbon credits and of course straight up paying for the waste. So another solution that we have been working on is called Fuel Leisure Digital Public Infrastructure, where we will be having farmers take part in the carbon credits, where we will be looking to democratize the carbon credit market with
mm,
through that application, and also use it as an incentive for people to use D30, because of course their carbon credit matters as well, because I've seen concepts where in certain countries they're planning to give certain persons a set number of carbon credits to use, and they will be applying that to how much meat a person can buy and so on. I believe that if that is something that can be done, then it's only fair to democratize carbon credits in a way that people can also gain carbon credits through their behavior or
definitely. I think so.
choices. Yes.
Yeah, definitely. The transition towards, the carbon credits and having people from these industries that, the agriculture and the forestry industry, that's a big part of how clean energy is going to be transitioned. So, do you think that this type of fuel production, can help create new opportunities and new industries in the Caribbean and Latin America?
Yes. So for the Caribbean, for sure, but for Latin America, doubly so, because Brazil is the number one producer of ethanol. So Brazil is a place where I would personally like to set up shop,
Mhm,
because I think Brazil's application for D30 would be one of the best in the world, because D30 has of the ability to work in cars on its own,
mhm,
as in without being blended. However, to meet fuel standards, we blend it. So I believe that in Brazil, I'm not sure how widespread this is, but they have blends that use up to more than 50% ethanol in their fuel, or some cars use even more than 50% ethanol. But that's a specialty issue where the engine have to be made specifically for that. So I believe that there's a massive opportunity in Latin America and also in the Caribbean for that, because of course, as we are seeing now, so many issues causing an energy crisis. And when push come to shove, and if there is the conflict spills over into a global reaching war, there there will be a need to have your energy needs secured. And of course, small islands developing states are not small island developing states are not always on the list of countries that have the type of let's say they're not on the top of the list for buyers and for buyers, sellers. They don't have priority on what fuel might be available. So we might need to stretch our energy as much as possible. So of course,
Definitely.
that's another application. Yeah.
Yeah. So, small island states are often, the first to feel the climate impacts, but rarely, lead climate innovations conversations globally. So what advantages, do innovators like you in the global south bring to, the climate solutions? What do you feel like that?
Right. So I believe that we are always the first to feel it because, of course, just based on the law of energy transfer, we have much smaller land, so um, we are able to feel the effects much quicker and notice the effects much quicker. Um, Almost a decade ago, I can tell the difference that water levels have risen for us here in
Mhm.
Jamaica because Jamaica is so small, so we actually notice it. And the heat difference as well, because for the same reason, the country is relatively well, is very small. There are cities larger than our country. So we understand the climate situation because we live it. And of course, the climate situation affect a lot of the island's livelihoods, such as fisheries, beaches and tourism and so on. So we are quick to actually notice it because a lot of persons in Jamaica, it's their lifeline.
Definitely. So,
Yeah.
so at Trillion Trees, I'm gonna come back to me now. At Trillion Trees, we often talk about something called tree impact. Not just planting trees, but measuring survival, ecosystem restoration, biodiversity, and all the community benefit that comes with it. And then we also work on nature-based climate solutions, especially reforestation and ecosystem restoration, while also partnering with companies like you that are working on actual real climate technologies. So I would like to sum up this into one last question from your perspective, how important it is that climate solutions, whether fuels or forestry, focus on real measurable impact rather than the symbolic climate actions that are happening right now.
All right. So the importance of these solutions is, without sounding redundant, the most important thing possible because we know the effects of trees, sequestration, carbon sequestration, um, cleaning air from not just carbon but other pollutants and particulates. These solutions give real time impact and immediately. And of course, we now know that the earth is one big organism where our two lungs is one in the Congo, one in the Amazon. So that's basically the
Mm.
lungs of earth. So we can't afford to mess up said lungs because lung cancer, not a cure, there's not a cure for it, none. So we need to have as much backing as possible to ensure that we have these technologies that are out there to do as much as possible to keep our planet habitable for us. And the reason why I say habitable for us is because Earth will always be here. Earth will always bounce back. So if we make the planet inhabitable for ourselves, just give it a hundred or 200 or 300 years, Earth will come back to being Earth. Will come back
Mm.
to being habitable eventually. So it's always in our own best interest and not just for the interest of other organisms, even though they are equally as important.
Definitely. Damani, this was really an insightful conversation, especially, hearing about you, your work, about D30, and, how climate innovation is, emerging from regions that are often the most impacted by climate change. Clean fuels, circular agriculture, and ecosystem restoration are all the pieces of the same puzzle that I feel like. So thank you again for joining us and sharing your work. It was lovely to have you. And yeah,
It was great to be here and thank you for having me. And I hope you continue with your initiative as well.
definitely. To all the people who are watching this, we will be back with another episode really, really soon. Bye bye.